The fluorescent lights of the Oak Crest Community Clubhouse hummed with a sterile, indifferent buzz, a sound that always set Daniel Grady's teeth on edge. He sat in the back row of uncomfortable plastic chairs, a lone island of denim and worn leather in a sea of polo shirts and pressed khakis. This was the monthly meeting of the Architectural Control Committee, a body whose very existence felt like an affront to the sprawling, untamed acres of his family farm, which bordered this meticulously curated subdivision. He was only here as an observer, a courtesy extended after a neighbor had mentioned his property might be on the agenda. At the head of the room, behind a long folding table, sat Karen Denton, chairperson of the ACC and newly elected president of the board of directors. She radiated an aura of absolute authority, her posture ramrod straight, her blonde bob sculpted into a helmet of unflappable certainty. "Next on the agenda," she announced, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth, "is the ongoing issue of the northern boundary view corridor." Her eyes, the pale blue of a winter sky, swept the room before landing squarely on Daniel. "Mr. Grady, thank you for joining us." The words were polite, but the tone was that of a teacher addressing a truant. Daniel gave a slow, deliberate nod. He had learned in his 30 years as a fire captain that the first person to lose their composure in a tense situation was the first person to lose. Period. "As you know," Karen continued, addressing the room but looking only at him, "our community standards are paramount to maintaining property values. The CC&Rs are very clear about obstructions that impact the scenic enjoyment of our homeowners." She gestured vaguely toward the window, which offered a view of meticulously manicured lawns and, beyond them, the tall green stalks of Daniel's cornfield. "While we appreciate the rustic charm of your agricultural activities, the equipment and unmanaged foliage along the common area boundary are becoming an eyesore." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled homeowners. Daniel remained silent, his hands resting on his knees. He had heard this before, in whispers and passive-aggressive emails forwarded to him by sympathetic neighbors. "For those unfamiliar," Karen said, adopting a condescendingly educational tone, "the Homeowners Association has a duty to protect the aesthetic integrity of Oak Crest. This includes ensuring that designated view corridors, which provide a sense of open space and connect our community to the natural landscape, remain unobstructed." She smiled, a thin, bloodless curve of her lips. "We're not asking you to stop farming, Daniel. We're simply asking for a bit of neighborly consideration. A 10-foot setback of all equipment and a more manicured approach to the fence line would be a wonderful start." Daniel let the silence hang for a beat, feeling the weight of 20 pairs of expectant eyes. He had promised his late brother, Michael, that he would keep the farm running, that he would protect the land that had been in their family for 3 generations. This was part of that promise. He finally spoke, his voice low and steady, carrying easily in the quiet room. "Karen, I appreciate the invitation." He met her gaze without blinking. "Could you please direct me to the specific covenant in the declaration that defines this view corridor you're referring to? And could you provide me with a copy of the recorded easement on my property's deed that grants the HOA any authority over my land?" The smile on Karen's face faltered, a barely perceptible tightening at the corners of her mouth. The room went dead quiet. She had expected a grumbling farmer, not a man who spoke the language of deeds and covenants. "Well, it's a matter of general community standards, outlined in Article 8, she stammered, shuffling through her papers. "Article 8, Section 4, Subsection 2, Daniel asked, his voice still even. "I have a copy. It refers to designated view corridors as defined on the official plat map filed with the county. I'd be very interested to see that map. In the meantime, I'd appreciate any future communication on this matter to be in writing, citing the specific legal authority you believe you're operating under." He stood up slowly, a tall, solid man who suddenly seemed to take up more space than the room could comfortably afford. He gave a slight nod to the rest of the committee. "Thank you for your time." As he walked out, the sterile hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to mock the stunned silence he left in his wake. He knew this wasn't over. It was just the opening salvo in a war he never wanted to fight. A war of paper and procedure against a woman who saw his family's legacy as nothing more than an unmanaged patch of weeds spoiling her perfect view. The next morning, Daniel was up before the sun, the familiar weight of his chores a comforting anchor. He stood on the back porch of the old farmhouse, a steaming mug of black coffee warming his hands, and looked out over the fields. The land wasn't just dirt and crops to him. It was a living repository of memory. He saw his brother Michael, years younger, wrestling with a broken irrigation pipe, laughing as mud splattered his face. He saw his father on the old John Deere, a silhouette against a setting sun. This farm was the last tangible piece of them he had left. It was barely breaking even most years, a stubborn holdout against the encroaching tide of suburban sprawl. But it was his. The thought of losing it, not to drought or blight, but to the petty tyranny of a homeowners association, was a cold knot in his gut. Later that day, an old, mud-splattered pickup truck rumbled down his gravel driveway. Abe Martin, his brother's best friend and a fellow farmer who had sold off most of his own land years ago, climbed out. He was a small, wiry man with skin like tanned leather and eyes that had seen 70 years of sunrises over these same hills. "Heard you rattled the hornet's nest last night," Abe said, skipping any pleasantries. He accepted the glass of iced tea Daniel offered and settled into a worn wicker chair on the porch. "I just asked a question," Daniel replied, leaning against the railing. Abe took a long swallow of tea. With Karen Denton, a question is a challenge, and that woman doesn't back down from a challenge. You be careful, son. She's not just any board president. She's been consolidating power over there for years. Got her own people on every committee. They say she pushed out the last 3 management companies until she found one that would do exactly what she wanted. No questions asked. It's my land, Abe. They have no jurisdiction. Jurisdiction's a funny thing, Abe mused, staring out at the fence line that separated Daniel's corn from Oakcrest's perfect green lawns. To a lawyer, it's a line on a map. To someone like Karen, it's wherever she decides her influence ought to be. She's been talking about that view corridor for months. Sells it to the homeowners as protecting their investment. Makes them feel like they're losing something they never had in the first place. He looked at Daniel, his expression serious. It's not just dirt to you, son. It's memory. To her, it's just a line item on her agenda. Don't ever forget that. Later that afternoon, Daniel pulled out the thick binder of HOA documents a neighbor had quietly given him when he'd first heard whispers of the view issue. He found the page he'd bookmarked, Article 8, Nuisances and Restricted Activities. He circled the clause in question with a red pen. Paragraph 8.4.2, View impairment. No structure, planting, fence, or other material shall be placed or permitted to remain upon any lot or common area, which may unreasonably obstruct designated view corridors or sightlines from adjacent lots. In the margin, he had written his note from months ago. Vague. Where are these corridors defined? Check plat map. He had checked. He had spent an afternoon at the county recorder's office when this first came up. He found nothing. No designated corridor. No scenic easement. Nothing but a solid, unbroken property line. Karen was building her case on a foundation of pure fiction. August 22nd. The mail truck came late that Monday. tucked between a circular for a local pizza place and a bill from the electric co-op, was a crisp, green and white envelope. It wasn't a standard letter. The green stripe at the top and the tracking number sticker told him exactly what it was before he even opened it. Certified mail. Return receipt requested. The first official shot had been fired. His hands, steady enough to reset a dislocated shoulder or steer a fire engine through a blizzard, felt clumsy as he sliced the envelope open. The letterhead was from Oak Crest HOA CO Sterling Management Solutions. The language was cold, formal, and utterly detached. Formal notice of violation. Date August 20th. Property owner Daniel Grady. 1120 Granger Road. Alleged violation. CC&R Article 8. Section 8.4.2. Obstruction of designated view corridor. Dear Mr. Grady, this letter serves as a formal notice of a violation of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions CC&Rs governing the Oak Crest community. An inspection conducted on August 18th found that a line of agricultural equipment, including a tractor and a planting attachment and unmaintained overgrowth, are currently situated within the 10-foot scenic buffer zone bordering the northern edge of the Oak Crest common area. As per FAR 8.4.2, this constitutes an unreasonable obstruction of a designated view corridor. You have 30 days from the date of this notice to cure the violation. Curing the violation requires the permanent removal of all equipment from this zone and the trimming of all foliage along the fence line to a height not to exceed 6 feet. Failure to cure this violation within the allotted time frame will result in the assessment of a daily fine of $100 until the property is brought into compliance. You have the right to contest this violation by requesting a formal hearing with the Board of Directors within 10 days. Sincerely, the Oak Crest Board of Directors. Below the typed signature was a crisp, authoritative autograph in blue ink. K. Denton. Daniel placed the violation notice on his kitchen table, carefully aligning its edges with the wood grain. He smoothed it flat, once, with the palm of his hand. It wasn't a suggestion anymore. It was a threat, codified and sent via the United States Postal Service. They were trying to fine him for parking his own tractor on his own land, based on a rule from a club he didn't belong to, citing a view corridor that didn't exist. A slow, heavy rhythm started in his chest, a deep drumbeat of dread and resolve. This was exactly what Abe had warned him about. The battle had begun. August 29th. Daniel spent the better part of a day composing his response. He didn't write it in anger. He wrote it with the same meticulous precision he used when filling out an incident report after a 4-alarm fire. He cited the county's official property records. He included a copy of his own land survey, the one his father had commissioned in 1988, which clearly showed his property line, and the absence of any scenic easements. He formally disputed the HOA's jurisdiction and stated that any attempt to levy fines against him would be considered harassment. He addressed it to the Board of Directors, care of Sterling Management, and sent it via certified mail, keeping a copy of the letter and the receipt. He was building his own paper trail. September 8th. The reply came 10 days later. It wasn't a letter addressing his points. It was a form letter. It was printed on the same Sterling Management letterhead. A masterpiece of bureaucratic indifference. Dear Mr. Grady, thank you for your correspondence regarding the violation notice dated August 20th. We have received your letter, and its contents have been noted. However, the Board of Directors has reviewed the matter, and their decision remains final. The 30-day period to cure the violation is still in effect. If you wish to appeal this decision, you must attend the next scheduled board hearing on September 15th. Sincerely, Sterling Management Solutions. They hadn't even engaged. They had simply ignored his evidence and reiterated their threat. The system wasn't designed for dialogue. It was a one-way conveyor belt moving toward compliance or punishment. Daniel stared at the letter, a cold clarity settling over him. He couldn't fight this with letters alone. He needed an arsenal. He needed proof so undeniable that it would shatter the foundation of Karen's authority. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Eleanor, it's Daniel Grady. I need your help. I need you to dig up every single document the county has on a piece of land bordering Oak Crest. Original developer plans, plat maps, easement filings, everything. I think someone is trying to steal a piece of my farm with paperwork, and I'm going to need a bigger shovel than they have." On the other end of the line, he heard the delighted chuckle of a retired county clerk who lived for the thrill of a bureaucratic hunt. "Oh, Daniel," Eleanor said, her voice crackling with energy. "This sounds like fun." The rising action of Daniel's war was fought not in fields, but in the hushed, dusty aisles of the county recorder's office. Eleanor Vance, a woman whose formidable reputation was built on her encyclopedic knowledge of property law and a near-religious reverence for public records, was in her element. She moved through the archives like a librarian possessed, her sharp eyes scanning microfilm readers and unrolling brittle, oversized plat maps that smelled of time and forgotten ink. "They're bluffing," she declared to Daniel over the phone a few days into her search. She was standing in what she called the deed vault. The original master plan for Oak Crest shows a 5-foot utility easement on their side of the property line for drainage. But nothing on yours. No view corridor, no scenic buffer, no nothing. Your property line is as clean as a whistle. While Eleanor dug through the past, Karen was busy shaping the present. The September edition of the Oak Crest Community Newsletter landed in every mailbox in the subdivision, on the front page, nestled between an article about the upcoming Fall Festival and a reminder to hide trash cans from street view, was a piece penned by Kay Denton herself. It was titled, "Protecting Our Shared Investment." The article never mentioned Daniel by name. It didn't have to. It spoke of the challenges of bordering undeveloped agricultural land, the visual impact of industrial farming equipment, and the board's proactive efforts to enforce community standards to protect property values for everyone. It was a masterpiece of insinuation, painting Daniel as a stubborn, uncooperative outsider whose very existence was a threat to their suburban dream. It was a public declaration of war, dressed up as a friendly community reminder. Daniel read it standing by his mailbox, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. He was being cast as the villain in a story he never asked to be in. The official notice for the board hearing arrived on September 10th. It was another sterile, formal document, informing him that his appeal would be heard on Thursday, September 15th, at 7:00 p.m. in the clubhouse. He was allotted 5 minutes to present his case. He spent the next few days with Eleanor, preparing. They assembled a binder, each piece of evidence encased in a clear plastic sleeve. The first violation notice, his detailed response letter, the management company's dismissive reply, a certified copy of his property deed, the official county plat map, enlarged to show the clear, unambiguous property line. "This should be enough to shut them down completely," Daniel said, tapping the thick binder. "For a board interested in facts." "Yes," Eleanor cautioned, adjusting her glasses. "But you're not dealing with a board interested in facts. You're dealing with a board led by a woman on a mission. We need to know why she's so obsessed with this specific strip of land." That question hung in the air, unanswered, until the morning of the hearing. Eleanor called him, her voice tight with the thrill of discovery. "Daniel, you need to come down here. I've found something. It's not in the property records. It's in the HOA's own archives. Daniel met her in a small, windowless room at the back of the county office, where the HOA was legally required to file its official records, including meeting minutes. Eleanor had a stack of documents on the table. Under state law, homeowners have the right to request official records, she explained, her finger tracing a line on a document. A friend of mine who lives in Oak Crest filed the request for me. They got the minutes from all the board meetings for the last 5 years. Look at this. She pushed a page toward him, dated 3 years prior. It was a copy of the minutes from a board of directors meeting. A full paragraph in the middle of the page had been redacted, blacked out with a thick marker. The header for the redacted section read, "Discussion regarding Northern Boundary Acquisition." Redacting official minutes is highly irregular unless it pertains to active litigation or sensitive employee matters, Eleanor said. This is neither. They're hiding something. Just then, her cell phone buzzed. It was her friend from Oak Crest. Eleanor listened, her eyes widening. She hung up and looked at Daniel. My source has a friend who was on the board back then. He quit because he couldn't stand Karen. He says he remembers that meeting. He says he might even have his old, unredacted notes. The hearing was only hours away. The puzzle was still missing its most important piece. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon when Eleanor's friend called back. He had found his notes. Eleanor scribbled furiously as he read them over the phone. When she hung up, she stared at the notepad, her expression a mixture of shock and grim satisfaction. We have it, she said softly. This isn't about a view. It was never about a view. She explained what the former board member had told her. The redacted minutes documented a formal proposal put forward by Karen Denton herself. She had wanted the HOA to make a formal offer to Daniel to purchase a 20-foot wide strip of his land along the fence line, the very same strip she now claimed was a scenic corridor. Her proposal argued that acquiring the land would allow the HOA to build a decorative stone wall and a walking path, permanently securing the community's northern aesthetic. The board had voted it down, 4-1, citing the exorbitant cost and the fact that Daniel had shown no interest in selling. Karen hadn't been trying to enforce a rule. She had been trying to acquire his land. When the board denied her, she had manufactured a violation to try and take by force what she couldn't get with money. Her entire campaign was built on a personal, frustrated ambition. But why, Daniel asked. The pieces clicking into place. Why that specific piece of land? That's the other thing I found, Eleanor said, pulling out a different file. It contained old newspaper clippings from the local paper, saved on microfiche. She pointed to a black and white photo from 1978. It showed a family standing proudly on a plot of undeveloped land. The headline read, Denton family sells Granger Road parcel to Grady Farms amid financial hardship. In the photo, a farmer with a grim expression, Karen's father stood with his arm around his wife. And standing beside them, a small girl with a blonde bob and a sullen look on her face, was a very young Karen Denton. They were standing on the exact spot where Daniel's equipment shed now sat. Her family had been forced to sell that land to Daniel's father during a recession. It wasn't just a vendetta against an uncooperative farmer. It was a 40-year-old grudge. She saw Daniel as living on her legacy, and the HOA was her tool to reclaim a piece of what she felt her family had lost. The cold knot in Daniel's gut tightened. This was far more personal, and far more dangerous, than he had ever imagined. September 20th. The letter confirming the board's decision after the hearing was a formality. Daniel had presented his evidence calmly and rationally. He had displayed the plat map. He had quoted the CC&Rs back to them. The board, with Karen recusing herself, but watching from the side with the placid stillness of a frozen lake, had listened with blank expressions. They found him in violation and informed him that the $100 daily fines had begun, retroactive to the end of the cure period. The total was already $500. October 1st. The next envelope was the one Daniel had been dreading. Notice of intent to file a lion. The language was stark. The accumulated fines had now reached $1,600. If the amount was not paid in full within 30 days, the HOA's legal counsel would file a lien against his property at 1120 Granger Road for the unpaid amount, plus all associated legal fees. A lien was a direct threat to his ownership, a legal claim that could, if left unchallenged, eventually lead to foreclosure. It was the HOA's ultimate weapon. Simultaneously, Karen opened a new front. A city code enforcement truck pulled into his driveway 2 days later. An officer, looking apologetic, handed Daniel a notice. A complaint had been filed anonymously, of course alleging improper storage of agricultural chemicals and a potential runoff hazard. It was baseless. His chemicals were stored in a locked, county-approved containment shed. But it meant another fight, more paperwork, another inspection he had to prepare for. Karen was trying to bury him in a war of attrition. The clock was ticking. The lien would be filed in less than a month. His only remaining option was the one he had been dreading most, a public confrontation. The HOA's annual homeowners meeting was scheduled for October 25th. It was the one meeting a year where, by law, the floor had to be open to any member for comment. A neighbor, horrified by the board's actions, had already signed Daniel up for a 5-minute speaking slot on his behalf. Daniel looked at the binder of evidence on his kitchen table, the plat maps, the deeds, the redacted minutes, the old newspaper photo of a young Karen standing on the land she felt was stolen from her. He would have 5 minutes to dismantle a 40-year grudge and a 3-year campaign of lies, in front of the very people Karen had manipulated into believing he was the enemy. It was a test of character he had never wanted, but one he knew he had to face. The farm, and his brother's memory, depended on it. The community clubhouse was packed, a standing-room-only theater of suburban discontent. The air, thick with the scent of cheap coffee and simmering resentment, crackled with anticipation. This wasn't a typical annual homeowners meeting, and everyone knew it. Word of Daniel's fight, the fines, and the impending lien had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, whispered over fences and debated in hushed tones on the community Facebook page. He was no longer just the farmer next door. He was a symbol. Daniel stood at the back of the room, his evidence binder tucked under his arm. Abe was beside him, a silent, steady presence. On a large screen at the front of the room, a digital clock was projected, its red numerals stark against a blue background. Next to it was the agenda. The homeowner open forum was last, scheduled for 8:30 p.m. Karen Denton sat at the center of the board's table, a portrait of composure. She guided the meeting through its mundane business, the treasurer's report, the landscaping committee update, a vote on new holiday decorations with practiced efficiency. But Daniel could see the tension in the set of her jaw, the way her eyes kept flicking toward the clock. Just before the open forum began, a young man approached Daniel, his expression a mixture of anxiety and resolve. It was Rick, the new, quiet board member. He looked around nervously before speaking in a low voice. "She's planning to cut you off," he whispered, avoiding eye contact. "The management company rep is going to rule you out of order for discussing a matter of pending litigation. She thinks she can shut you down." He pressed a folded piece of paper into Daniel's hand. "This is the unredacted version of those minutes. The real one. Someone kept a copy. Do what you have to do." Before Daniel could respond, Rick melted back into the crowd. Daniel unfolded the paper. It was a clean copy of the minutes from 3 years ago. The blacked-out paragraph was now clear. It contained Karen's proposal to buy his land, her frustration at being denied, and one damning additional sentence that hadn't been in the former board member's notes. The motion was seconded for discussion by Rick Callahan before being voted down. Rick had initially supported her. His conscience had caught up to him late, but he had been complicit at the start. A cold wave washed over Daniel. This was the moral compass, the informant who had given him the final weapon, and the weapon was double-edged. "And now," Karen announced, her voice tight, "we will move to the homeowner open forum. Each speaker will have exactly 5 minutes. The timer will be strictly enforced. First on the list is Daniel Grady." A hush fell over the room. Daniel walked to the podium at the front, placed his binder on the lectern, and looked out at the faces staring back at him. He met Karen's icy gaze for a moment, before turning to the audience. "Good evening," he began, his voice calm and clear. "My name is Daniel Grady. My family has farmed the land bordering this community since 1952. The timer on the screen started its countdown 5-0. For the past 6 weeks, your board of directors, led by Ms. Denton, has been pursuing a campaign to find me and place a lien on my property." He held up the violation notice. "They claim I am obstructing a designated view corridor, as defined in your CC&Rs. Article 8, Section 8.4.2. He clicked a button on the laptop connected to the projector. The text of FERBR 8.4.2 appeared on the screen. 435. "The covenant is clear," he continued. "It applies to corridors, as defined on the official plat map filed with the county. For weeks, I have asked the board to produce this map. They have refused. So I got it myself." He clicked again. A high-resolution scan of the official county plat map filled the screen. A bright red arrow pointed to the border between his farm and Oak Crest. It was a single, solid, unbroken line. 410. "As you can see," Daniel said, his voice resonating with quiet authority, "there is no designated view corridor. There is no scenic easement. There is only a property line. The violation that serves as the basis for over $2,000 in fines and a lien on my family's farm is a fiction." A wave of murmurs swept the room. People were leaning forward, pointing at the screen, their expressions shifting from curiosity to confusion, then to anger. Karen stood up. "Mr. Chairman," she said, addressing the management company representative, "this is out of order. Mr. Grady is discussing a matter of pending legal action. He must be stopped." The representative, a harried-looking man in an ill-fitting suit, cleared his throat. "Mr. Grady, I'm afraid she's right. You cannot discuss." "I'm not discussing a lawsuit," Daniel cut in, his voice hardening just enough to command the room. "I am discussing the actions of this board, and I believe the homeowners here have a right to know why this board has spent your money pursuing a baseless claim." 320. He looked directly at Karen. "This was never about a view. It was about acquiring my land." He clicked to the next slide. It was the redacted version of the meeting minutes. The black bar was a stark accusation on the screen. "These are the official minutes from a board meeting 3 years ago, which I obtained through a public records request. As you can see, a key section is blacked out. I believe that section contains the real motive for this entire affair." He held the unredacted copy Rick had given him in his hand. The timer on the screen read 2:45. This was the moment. His moral dilemma. If he read the full text, he would expose Rick, the one person who had tried to do the right thing. However late, it would be a total, devastating victory. Or he could choose a different path, a more principled one. He looked out at the crowd. Then his eyes found Rick's. The young man was pale, his expression pleading. Daniel made his choice. He looked down at the paper, then back at the audience. The unredacted minutes state that Ms. Denton made a formal motion for the HOA to offer to purchase a 20-foot strip of my land. Her plan was to build a wall and a walking path. The board voted her down, citing the cost. He paused, letting the words sink in. When she couldn't convince the board to buy my land, she invented a violation to try and take it. He had omitted Rick's name. He had protected his source. It was a cleaner victory, one that affirmed his own character. The room erupted. "Is this true?" A man in the front row shouted at the board. "Did you know about this?" 1:30. Daniel wasn't finished. He clicked to his final slide. It was the black and white newspaper photograph from 1978. A young Karen Denton, standing on the land her family had just sold to his. "I believe this fight was never about property values," Daniel said, his voice softening with a note of finality. "It was personal. And you all have been used as pawns in a 40-year-old grudge." 0:59. The timer continued its silent countdown. But no one was watching it anymore. All eyes were on Karen, whose face had gone white with fury and humiliation. The management representative was banging a gavel, but the noise was lost in the cacophony of angry homeowners shouting questions, demanding answers. A motion, someone yelled from the back. "I make a motion for an immediate, independent audit of all board finances." Seconded came a chorus of voices. "Motion for a vote of no confidence in President Denton," another homeowner shouted. The meeting descended into chaos. The board was in shambles. The management representative, overwhelmed, declared the meeting adjourned. But no one left. They swarmed the table, demanding accountability. Daniel stepped away from the podium. His 5 minutes long since expired. Abe clapped him on the shoulder, a proud, rare smile on his face. Daniel had walked into the hornet's nest, and with nothing but the quiet power of the truth. He had brought it down. He had not only saved his farm, he had given a voice back to an entire community. The weeks following the disastrous annual meeting were a blur of swift, decisive change. The vote of no confidence in Karen Denton passed with a staggering majority in an emergency session forced by a petition of homeowners. Stripped of her power and facing an internal investigation spurred by the demand for an independent audit, she resigned from the board in a terse, one-sentence email. The audit quickly uncovered what Rick's information had hinted at: a pattern of misusing funds for personal vendettas, including hiring a high-priced attorney to draft the lien notice against Daniel, all under the guise of covenant enforcement. Karen and her few remaining allies on the board were swept out of power. A new, interim board was elected, with Rick Callahan, humbled but determined, serving as its temporary chair. Their first official act was to vote unanimously to rescind all fines against Daniel Grady, withdraw the notice of intent to lien, and issue a formal, public apology on behalf of the Oak Crest Homeowners Association. The letter was posted on the community bulletin board, and a copy was delivered by hand to Daniel's door. The city's code enforcement complaint against him was dismissed after a brief inspection found his farm to be in perfect compliance. The anonymous complaint was traced back to a burner email address, but the timing left little doubt as to its origin. With Karen's influence gone, the bureaucratic weapons she had wielded were rendered inert. One crisp autumn afternoon, a car Daniel didn't recognize pulled up his driveway. A man in a suit, The HOA's newly retained and much more sensible legal counsel got out. He carried a briefcase and an expression of profound weariness. The HOA, he explained, was eager to settle any potential civil claims Daniel might have against them to avoid a protracted and deeply embarrassing lawsuit. They made a modest but significant offer, enough to cover Daniel's time, his stress, and the cost of hiring Eleanor. Daniel sat at his kitchen table that night, looking at the settlement check. It was more money than the farm had cleared in the last 3 years combined. He could replace the old tractor, fix the roof on the barn, maybe even take a vacation for the first time in a decade. But as he looked out the window at the land his brother had entrusted to him, another idea began to form. This fight had never been about money. It had been about principle. The following spring, at the first annual meeting under the new board, Daniel once again took the podium during the open forum. This time, there was no timer, and the room was filled not with tension, but with a quiet, respectful attention. He announced that he was using the entirety of his settlement from the HOA, not for himself, but to establish the Oak Crest Community Fairness Fund. It was a small, independently managed fund designed to provide pro bono legal assistance to any homeowner who believed they had been unfairly targeted by a past or future board. It was his way of ensuring that no one else would have to fight the kind of lonely, expensive battle he had endured. He was turning his victory into a legacy, a permanent shield for the community that had once seen him as an adversary. A slow, steady wave of applause filled the room. It was a sound of gratitude, of respect, and of a community beginning to heal. Daniel looked out at his neighbors and saw not the manicured lawns and identical houses, but the people who lived within them. People who, like him, just wanted to live in peace. The fence line between his farm and their subdivision no longer felt like a border between two worlds, but a bridge. He finished his work in the fields late that evening, the setting sun casting long shadows across the newly planted rows of corn. He stood at the edge of the property, at the very spot Karen Denton had coveted, and felt the cool evening breeze wash over him. The land was safe. His brother's promise was kept. And in the quiet hum of the emerging twilight, he found a sense of wholeness that no violation notice could ever threaten again.